Fornax howled in agony as human medics tore shrapnel from his mangled body, but he would soon face an even greater shock. Humans saving the life of their alien enemy. Fornax, the brilliant Illyrian general, lay broken and bleeding on the war-torn battlefield of planet XK-47, abandoned by his own troops. The stench of rotting alien flesh stung his nostrils. Charred rubble stretched for miles, the only remaining trace of the proud Illyrian outpost. Fornax had stayed behind, outnumbered and outgunned, providing covering fire so his soldiers could escape the advancing Zephyrian forces. Wave after wave of savage Zephyrians had crashed upon their defenses until ammunition ran dry. Fornax's vision blurred as he bled out into the dust, his life ebbing away with each weak beat of his heart. The deafening roar of dropship thrusters jolted him to consciousness. A squad of heavily armed Terran Marines stormed out, scanning for threats. Fornax recognized the human commander instantly, Gunnery Sergeant Wayne Ross. Though officially neutral in the war, Ross had a reputation for never leaving anyone behind, regardless of species. Zephyrian mortar shells rained down around the dropship as Ross dragged Fornax aboard. Fornax gasped in shock and pain, stunned that his rescuers were human. If Fornax died, the Illyrian resistance would collapse, and the Zephyrians would exterminate his entire species. He had to survive, but Fornax would soon learn that human compassion was just as surprising as their combat prowess. The dropship lifted off, narrowly outpacing the incoming artillery barrage, carrying Fornax to an uncertain fate. Fornax drifted in and out of consciousness as the human medics worked, stripping off his scorched and shredded armor. They disinfected his wounds and dug out chunks of shrapnel, dropping the bloody metal shards into a tray with a series of clinks. Fornax gasped, his body arching against the restraints as the doctors stitched together his torn flesh. One medic hung an IV bag, and soon a strange coolness flowed through Fornax's veins, dulling the searing pain to a distant throb. Strange visions swam before Fornax's eyes as the drugs took hold. He was back at the Illyrian Military Academy, standing at attention with his fellow cadets as the instructors paced before them. "Cadet Fornax," Sergeant Vortex barked, his steely gaze boring into Fornax. "You scored top marks in tactical analysis and leadership. Explain the most essential traits of a commander." "Discipline, sir," Fornax replied without hesitation. "A commander must make hard choices knowing the cost. He bears the weight of responsibility for those under his charge." The dream shifted, and Fornax found himself on the bridge of the IWS Dauntless, alarms blaring as a Zephyrian warship emerged from the asteroid field. The captain froze, eyes wide with panic. "Evasive maneuvers," Fornax shouted, leaping to the tactical console. His fingers flew over the controls, diverting power to shields and bringing the forward rail cannons online. The Dauntless shuddered as the enemy opened fire, but Fornax held the ship steady, aiming the guns with cold precision. The Zephyrian ship exploded into a ball of flame, and the bridge crew erupted into cheers. More memories flooded Fornax's mind, each one a bittersweet reminder of the sacrifices he had made. Friends lost, worlds burned, a once proud people reduced to scattered refugees. All of it he carried on his shoulders. Fornax's eyes flickered open. He winced against the bright lights. The air smelled sterile, recycled. A medical bay. His heart began to race as panic set in. He thrashed in the bed, IV lines tugging at his arms. Where was he? The last thing he remembered was bleeding out on that dusty battlefield, as strange ships descended through the smoke. "Whoa there, General, you're safe. I need you to calm down before you tear your stitches," a deep voice said. A large hand pressed Fornax back against the pillows. Fornax blinked rapidly, the blurry face above him coming into focus. It was a human, the same one from the dropship. Ross, the Marines had called him. "Why did you bring me here?" Fornax demanded, his voice raspy. "What do you want from me?" Ross pulled a chair over and sat down, shaking his head. "You don't owe us anything, General. We weren't about to leave you behind to die like that. It wouldn't have been right." Fornax barked out a laugh, then winced as pain lanced through his side. "In my experience, no one does anything for free, especially not in war." Everyone has an angle, a motive. So what's yours? Ross leaned back, crossing his arms over his broad chest. Believe it or not, we have this thing called a conscience, a code of honor we live by. He fixed Fornax with a piercing stare, his eyes haunted. I've seen some shit, General. More than any being should. War is an ugly business. It brings out the worst in people, turns them into monsters. I've watched good soldiers, friends, do unspeakable things in the name of survival or victory. The Marine rubbed a hand over his stubbled jaw, his gaze distant. But through it all, I've learned that you have to hold on to your humanity, your compassion. The moment you lose that, you're no better than the enemy you're fighting. So yeah, we could have left you there to die. But that's not who we are. That's not what we stand for. Fornax studied Ross, searching for any hint of deception. But the human's expression was open, sincere. Fornax looked away, his mind reeling. All his life he had been taught that humans were weak, inferior, that their lack of aggression made them unfit for the harsh realities of the galaxy. But now, faced with their selfless act of mercy, he began to question everything he thought he knew. I suppose I owe you my thanks, Fornax said stiffly, the words foreign on his tongue. Your actions were unexpected, honorable even. He met Ross's gaze, a grudging respect in his eyes. It seems there is more to your species than I initially believed. Ross smiled wryly. We're full of surprises. He stood, checking the readouts on the medical monitors. Get some rest, General. You're not out of the woods yet. We'll talk more when you're stronger. As Ross turned to leave, Fornax called out, Wait, the war, my people, I need to... He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness washed over him. Easy there, Ross said, gently pushing him back down. The war will still be there when you wake up. For now, focus on healing. You're no good to your people dead. With that, he dimmed the lights and left the room, leaving Fornax alone with his thoughts. As he drifted off to sleep, Fornax couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed, that his encounter with the humans had set something in motion, some shift in the balance of power. Only time would tell what the future held, but one thing was certain. Fornax would never underestimate the humans again. As the days passed, Fornax found himself growing stronger, his wounds healing under the watchful care of the human doctors. They spoke to him of their society, a marvel of technological advancement and social progress. The more Fornax learned, the more his long-held beliefs about humans began to crumble. Dr. Eliza Novak, the lead physician overseeing his recovery, sat beside his bed, a datapad in hand. Your people have suffered greatly in this war, she said, her voice filled with compassion. But it doesn't have to be this way. We have medical technologies that could save countless lives on both sides of the conflict. Fornax's brow furrowed. You would share your advancements with us? Why? Because every life has value, regardless of species, Dr. Novak replied. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. General, we're offering you a chance to not only heal your own wounds, but those of your people as well. Fornax looked away, conflicted. To accept aid from a neutral party, especially one as enigmatic as the humans, could be seen as a sign of weakness. His superiors would surely balk at the idea. And yet, the thought of saving Illyrian lives, of easing the suffering of his war-torn people, was a temptation he could not ignore. In the days that followed, Fornax found himself in deep discussions with human diplomats and scientists. They spoke of their own history, a tale of a species that had nearly destroyed itself through centuries of war and strife. But somehow, against all odds, they had found a path to lasting peace. The key is communication, Ambassador Jolanira explained, his holographic image flickering above the conference table. When we learn to truly listen to one another, to understand our differences and find common ground, everything changed. Fornax leaned forward, intrigued. And you believe this could work for the Illyrians and Zephyrians? Ambassador Ira nodded. With our advanced communication technology, we could facilitate negotiations, provide a neutral ground for dialogue. It won't be easy, but it's a chance for a new beginning. Fornax felt a flicker of hope in his chest. an emotion he had long since buried beneath the weight of duty and sacrifice. He thought of the countless lives lost, the families torn apart, the once vibrant worlds reduced to ash. If there was even a chance to end the bloodshed, didn't he owe it to his people to try? "I'll need to present this to my superiors," Fornax said, his voice gruff. "They won't like it. They'll see it as a surrender, a betrayal of everything we've fought for." Ambassador Ira smiled sadly. "Change is never easy, General, but sometimes it's the only way forward." As the meeting adjourned, Fornax stood tall, his shoulders squared with newfound purpose. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, that convincing his people to lay down their arms and embrace peace would be a battle in itself. But armed with a newfound respect for human ingenuity and compassion, he was determined to see it through. Fornax strode through the halls of the human station, his steps sure and purposeful. The scars of war still ached with every movement, but he pushed the pain aside. He had a new mission now, one that could change the course of history itself, and he would not rest until his people knew the same hope for peace that the humans had shown him. The sleek human diplomatic shuttle touched down on the scorched landing pad, scattering ash and debris. Fornax emerged, flanked by Ross and the human delegation, their faces grim as they surveyed the devastation. The once proud Illyrian capital lay in ruins, its towering spires reduced to rubble, smoke rising from the wreckage like the final breaths of a dying giant. Fornax staggered forward, his steps heavy with dread. He had expected resistance, even hostility from his government, but this was a nightmare made real. A ragged group of survivors huddled near the ruins of the Grand Assembly Hall, their hollow eyes filled with despair. Fornax approached an elderly Illyrian male, his tattered robes marking him as a member of the High Council. "Councillor Zathric," Fornax said, his voice hoarse, "what happened here?" Zathric looked up, his face etched with grief. "The Zephyrians," he rasped. "They came without warning, without mercy. Our defenses were still recovering from the last assault. We didn't stand a chance." Fornax's heart constricted, a cold fear gripping his chest. "My family," he managed, dreading the answer. "Did they—" Zathric bowed his head, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. "I'm sorry, General. They were in the city center when the bombs fell. There were no survivors." A keening cry tore from Fornax's throat, a sound of pure anguish. He fell to his knees, the weight of his loss crushing him like a physical blow. Ross placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent gesture of support, but Fornax barely felt it. His world had shattered, leaving nothing but jagged shards of grief and rage. "Take me to the High Command," Fornax growled, rising to his feet. His eyes blazed with a fury that threatened to consume him, but beneath it lay a steely resolve. "We have much to discuss." The meeting with the Illyrian High Command was a disaster from the start. The generals, their faces haggard and their uniforms stained with the blood of their fallen comrades, greeted the human delegation with open hostility. "You dare come here seeking to dictate terms to us?" General Zorphus sneered, his lip curling in disdain. "We are at war, in case you haven't noticed. We have no time for your meddling." Fornax slammed his fist on the table, the sudden violence of the gesture startling the room into silence. "Enough," he roared, his voice raw with grief and anger. "Can't you see? This war is destroying us, tearing our people apart. We have a chance here, a chance to end this madness before it consumes us all." He turned to the humans, his eyes pleading. "Tell them," he urged. "Tell them what you told me about the path to peace." Ambassador Ira stepped forward, his holographic image flickering in the dim light. "Generals," he began, his voice calm and measured. "We come to you not as conquerors or saviors, but as fellow sentients who have seen the horrors of war and found a way to rise above them. Our technology, our resources are yours if only you'll let us help you find a better way." But the generals were unmoved. They saw only weakness in the humans' words, a ploy to undermine their resolve. "We will not surrender," General Zorphus declared, his voice dripping with venom. "We will fight to the last Illyrian, to the last drop of blood, and we will have our vengeance." Fornax reeled back as if struck, the weight of his people's stubbornness crushing his last hopes. He looked to Ross, to the human delegation, their faces etched with sorrow and disappointment. In that moment, Fornax made a decision that would change the course of his life. With a heavy heart, he unclipped his rank insignia from his uniform and placed it on the table. "I cannot be a part of this any longer," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I hereby resign my commission and exile myself from Illyrian society. I will not stand by and watch my people destroy themselves in the name of pride and vengeance." The room erupted into chaos, the generals shouting their outrage and disbelief. But Fornax stood tall, his resolve unwavering. He turned to Ross, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I will join you," he said, his voice steady. "I will fight alongside you to bring an end to this war and to honor the memory of my family." Ross clasped Fornax's shoulder, a gesture of respect and solidarity. "We welcome you, Fornax," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Together, we will find a way to bring peace to this galaxy, no matter the cost." As they boarded the human shuttle, leaving the ruins of his past behind, Fornax felt a strange sense of lightness, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, that the scars of war would never truly heal. But for the first time in his life, he had a purpose that extended beyond the narrow confines of duty and loyalty. He would fight for something greater, for a future where no child would know the pain of losing a parent to the horrors of war, where no soldier would have to bear the weight of countless lives on their conscience. With a final glance at the shattered remains of his homeworld, Fornax stepped into the shuttle, ready to embrace his new destiny. The universe was a vast and unforgiving place, but with the humans by his side, he knew that anything was possible. The shuttle lifted off, its engines roaring as it clawed its way through the atmosphere. Fornax watched through the viewscreen as the Illyrian capital receded into the distance, a once proud testament to his people's ingenuity and resilience reduced to a smoldering ruin. If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.